Well, good afternoon, everybody. It is time for us to start our next webinar. And today we're looking at the question of the role of schools in challenging extremism. And my name's Claire Clinton. And if you've not logged on to one of these webinars before or looked at them in our library of supports for teachers in schools around issues to do with interfaith, then you're very welcome this afternoon. Let's just start by going through and explaining some of the things you can see in front of you. So if you're watching me, you'll also see that there is a PowerPoint presentation to take us through our webinar this afternoon on challenging extremism. And we know that some of you have that up in front of you and listen to me and when I have people with me. Other people prefer to have that printed out in front of them so they can make notes on it and have me there visually as well. So obviously, if you need to get that sorted, then you can press the pause button. For those of us watching live, we're just carrying on. So, Interfaith Explorers is a great resource, web-based resource that's been produced with teachers in mind to help us and support us to have really great interfaith conversations in the classroom, and for our pupils and young people to learn more about differences between people in terms of beliefs as well as culture, and also to improve those skills of being able to listen and reflect and to think about new ideas and new ways of doing things. And the resources are all available on the website. You create yourself an account and then you can access all of them. So we do recommend those to you, and there are lots of supports on there, not only in terms of our back catalogue of webinars that we've been doing over this last year, but also in terms of videos that are on there from different people, from different faiths, talking about different aspects of their belief and also their practice. All of these things trying to bring religion and difference to life in your classroom. So the resources oh gosh, I've had a blank moment. I'll come back to you. The resource is also supported by UNESCO, and that's important that it has that sort of recognition of being good and safe for us to use in schools. So let's have a look at our session objectives this afternoon. We've got a few, and the first one is to help us understand what's meant by extremism when the government is talking about that in terms of the prevent strategy, but also in terms of the government's duty on schools around preventing extremism. Secondly, we want to explore Ofsted requirements to schools to promote those fundamental British values as defined by Ofsted, and also to look at behaviour and safety of pupils. That's an important part as well, as you know, of an Ofsted inspection. And finally, we want to help you think about how you can facilitate really good discussions and building up skills that will allow young people and children to have resilience and to be able to think through issues for themselves as they come across them outside of our classrooms, outside of our school contexts, in everyday life. That will keep them safe in the future. And around those things, there are some risks and some best practice that we want to highlight to you, and also just explain to you some of those best practices that are going on in the country. So, first of all, let's start with the government's definition. So the government says that in its prevent strategy, and you'll see on the PowerPoint that we're talking about 2011 when they first defined this, and I'm just going to read from it a little bit, but it says it's important to challenge extremist ideas, and that word will come up many times for us as teachers, and to challenge them where these extremist ideas are used to legitimise violence by terrorist groups. So the Counter-Terrorism and Security Act that's been passed this year places a duty on organisations, including schools, to prevent people being drawn into terrorism. So this is linked to the legal requirement of all public funded schools to teach a broad and balanced curriculum, and also to promote community cohesion, and to ensure that pupils are safeguarded against a risk of being associated with terrorist groups and being, in a sense, groomed by some of those ideas. So what does this mean for us? And I think for many teachers, when I've been talking to people about doing this webinar today, it feels quite scary when we're talking about terrorism and challenging extremist ideas. I think it's something that you naturally feel a little bit nervous about because we want to get this right. And that shows that we're trying to do the best thing for our pupils. And that's an important starting point. So extremist ideas, okay, let's go to, I'm going to skip on, if you're looking at the PowerPoint, down the slide, and then I'm going to go back again, just to go to the Oxford English Dictionary in terms of defining extremism. And it says it's the holding of extreme political or religious views, especially ones that are advocating illegal action, violent action, some sort of extreme action. And I think that's quite helpful for us because we don't want to have the feeling that we're just talking about Islam and Islamic extremism, Islamic terrorism. And I think schools feel a tension here because we're wanting to give pupils facts and also positive messages around these different faiths and different ideas. And so there feels a little bit of a tension that we don't want all the focus to be on one religion or one particular group. And if I go back up a slide, you'll see that schools are expected to demonstrate effective procedures in looking at risks for their pupils, working in partnership with local safeguarding children boards as well as channel boards, and looking at staff training. And I just wanted to mention here that I found it really helpful going to the Prevent training put by the police here in Newham, and I know that is offered around the country to schools. It's a free training that you can bespoke to your context and your situation. So when I have been part of that training, I've been really impressed by the police who have led it. Their knowledge and their understanding of the school's context that I've been in, but also that schools are able to pick certain case studies from a range of different extreme views. And that's really helpful for schools because that then puts a lot of staff's minds at rest, that we're not just talking about one particular form of terrorist views and extreme ideologies. And so in the training that I've been in, yes, it has shown a case study from an Islamic group, but it's also shown a case study from a far-right Christian group. And in that particular school, that was really helpful, and that helps staff feel more secure and think about the bigger picture of what's going on here. And the bigger picture is that we're wanting young people to think about the things that people are saying to them and to be able to weigh them up. And that is quite challenging behaviour, to be able to do that well as a young person. We grow up in our family, in a context, in a cultural, a social context. And as we come into adulthood, there's often a challenging attitude that happens by teenagers. I have a 16-year-old son at the moment, and he loves nothing better than challenging and asking why. And that's part of them beginning to own for things themselves and really think things through. And so that's positive. And we want our young people and children to be able to do that well, so that if someone tells them something, they can ask where that information comes from. They can ask for proof, that they don't just swallow things and believe things because somebody maybe in authority is saying it, maybe somebody within their family is saying it, that they find contexts in which they can have those discussions. And as I've said earlier, Interfaith Explorers is trying to do that, is providing places where young people and children can have those discussions safely with people, a number of different participants, and so that they learn to listen and to think. And it is an important part for us as teachers then to make sure that we are challenging extremist views where we find them, but also we know what to do with them when we find them. And I suppose the most important thing I would say, and that I've learned across the years, is that you're never on your own in these things. When you find them, school is great because there are other people. We have line managers that we can go to, we have colleagues that we can discuss things through, and schools also sit with a number of other experts that they can draw on and talk to. And particularly the channel boards, which are a board which can help a young person think through and think, I suppose, with the different people involved in that young person's life, help them think through what would help in this particular situation, whatever those extremist views are. And so there will be someone in your school who will know how to make contact with these different boards and these different people. And so never feel out of depth. Always know where you can go to. That's a really important step, I would say, in preventing extremism and looking at how we challenge it. Okay, gosh, that was a lot of information. Hope you are still with me and just coping with the things that I'm saying to you. So if I go on to my next slide, it's the one with the Oxford English Dictionary definition on it, but it also talks about the government's prevent strategy. And just to read you a bit from that, it says that vocal or active opposition to fundamental British values, and there's 5 of those that have been defined for us by Ofsted: democracy, rule of law, individual liberty, mutual respect and tolerance of different faiths and beliefs. We also include in our definition extremism calls for the death of members of our armed forces, whether in this country or overseas. And you'll be able to see the link to situations going on right now in the world, as well as situations that have happened in the past in our country. So, for instance, Lee Rigby's murder last year. So these definitions have come out from the government because of things that we have been facing over recent years. So the government has been that. I think originally it was looked at for secondary schools and something that would be sensible for all secondary schools to do. But I also feel there's real benefits there of thinking through in the primary context as well about safeguarding. And also, as we know, with ideas and values, we start with pupils thinking around these things, the more resilient and robust they are to be able to grow into them and to be able to think about things when they come across them. Okay, so the government's prevent strategy with our own school values. I've been doing some work recently with one of our secondary schools here in Newham around working with faith leaders and other individuals who come into the school and are used in terms of collective worship, as well as coming into RE lessons, some of them running special table days around PSHE and citizenship. And so really useful. And that helped them to think about how to express their beliefs in sensitive ways, but also in which the school felt assured that they understood the context they were working in with these young people. The other thing that Ofsted has now put into its guidance from September 2014, and it's again in the January 2015 guidance for inspectors, is looking at how schools support these fundamental British values. And that's about children's social development. And the important phrase there is about how we as a school help young people and children to participate fully in and contribute positively to life in modern Britain. And again, I would take you to those words, and it's worth thinking about as a school. How do we do that? How are we helping our children and young people to participate in British society and also make a positive contribution to? And there's many things that we do in terms of curriculum and extracurricular and trips that all feed into this, as well as our RE and our collective worship provision. And all of these things sit under our SMSC, our spiritual, moral, social and cultural development of pupils. And as you know, we have done a previous webinar on SMSC. So if that's something that you don't feel so confident about, I would suggest that you go and have a look and listen to either the resources or have a listen to me last year talking about that, because that is really important. And it's really important that your school is clear on how it makes a contribution to SMSC, pupils' development, because it's all about how they participate in and how they contribute to this at the moment and also for later life, that we're getting them ready for that. The other thing that I think has come through those fundamental British values as defined by Ofsted is that our curriculum in our schools is broad and balanced. And so that we're not saying boys can do this and girls can do that. I remember when I was at school, I wasn't allowed to do technical drawing. That wasn't an option for me. So that shows how old I am. Schools haven't been like that for a while. But it is important that it is broad and it's balanced. So in terms of RE, there's a change coming this year in terms of the GCSE. So no longer can any school, including faith schools, just study one religion to GCSE. Before, you could just do 2 papers in Islam or in Judaism or in Christianity, Hinduism, Sikhism. That's gone now. So all faith schools, as well as state-funded schools, will need to produce an RE curriculum that is showing at GCSE even, looking at 2 different religions or more. So I think fundamental British values is another way of saying community cohesion. And I suppose about 7 years ago in education, community cohesion was the new thing, and schools had to show how they were building community links with the people outside their school as well as within their school. And I think building fundamental British values within our curriculum is another way of looking at that. And so much of the work that schools did 5, 6, 7 years ago around community action and community cohesion is the same work that comes up under promoting fundamental British values. And there's lots of things that you are doing as a school around democracy, if you have a school council, around law, because there will be consequences if children do or don't do certain things in the school. Individual liberty, there are safeguards within your school, safeguarding children and young people. Mutual respect, hopefully this balanced and broad curriculum will be showing that. Our attitudes, our values flowing out from our SMSC policy. And tolerance, which is a word I think lots of people struggle with, because it feels like tolerance means putting up with something you don't like. And there's a sense of that that's right about tolerance, but it's actually living peacefully with something you don't agree with necessarily. And that's a very powerful thing, to be able to get pupils to a point where they can disagree agreeably is a great skill for the rest of life. I'm sure you can think of, as well as I can think of now, people in my life who find that difficult and struggle with that as adults. And so if we can give opportunities to young people to grow that, that's a great thing. So we want young people to be able to think for themselves. We're not going to disagree with that. Weigh up different points of view and respectfully disagree with others. And Interfaith Explorers is doing all of those things. It's setting you off with a great range of resources and examples of how you can do that in your classroom right now to build up some of these skills. Okay. The other thing that Ofsted say that they'll look at is behaviour and safety of pupils. And that's about the risks that we take with who we invite into school, whether we know about them, how do we know about them, have we searched on the internet, are they linked to anything that we don't think those views would be good to have within our school. And also to just think through how radicalisation happens. And that's where the prevent training is really helpful, because it deals with real case studies of how young people have been radicalised. And there's a number of elements that come into that. We haven't got time today to go into all of those. But again, I would just send you to have a look at those resources, because they're good and they help us understand that process. And it doesn't matter which group the young people got involved with. There's a very similar steps of what happens. And it's important that we as a school have got supports ready to help those young people and those children through with those. So to have a school's response to that is an important thing, and it's something I would say that flows from your school values. It flows from your document on SMSC, your thinking through on that. And so don't be worried about it. It's just a good way of ensuring that children are safeguarded. And that's an important part of our role. As we're in loco parentis, we're looking after them as if they are our own children. And we want the very best for them. And we want to give them those skills where they can challenge and think about things for themselves. And where they're not doing that, where they're not open to that, where those views are expressed, or we have concerns, that we have systems within our schools of knowing where we go and who we talk to. And actually those things don't mean that children necessarily get taken to the police about something. Channel exists, and that channel board exists there, to have many different professionals there to think about the best way to help. And my grandmother always used to say that many minds help, and that's what those boards are about. It's about honesty, but it's also about trying to think together what might be the best way forward, because we know some of these situations are really tough and really hard. And though we have to be responsible as teachers, we also have to have boundaries, and that's why having other people where we can talk about things and think things through is really helpful. Okay, so what about facilitating discussions around extremism in the classroom? So before we can do that, there's a number of things that we need. And first of all, we need to make sure that we've got some firm foundations in place with some agreed ways of working. So pupils are very clear about our values, that we have got the right climate for discussion, they understand the do's and don'ts of discussions, that when topics come up, that we as a teacher go and talk to our mentors, our line managers, and just check how somebody else would handle things. That we make sure that we have balance and objectivity within those discussions, and we avoid bias. Now, we've all got our own bias, and I think if we're aware of that, then that helps us to bring greater balance. I think if you think you're neutral, then in a sense, for me, that's more dangerous, because we have all got our bias, and knowing ourselves, I think, is really important in terms of these interfaith discussions, and discussions maybe that are touching on extremist ideas and extremism. So it's important that pupils can trust us. It's important that they have confidence that we can lead them through. I often say, even if they're saying things that are difficult, it's better that they're saying them than just thinking them. Because once they're out, there's an ability for us to be able to challenge, and to do that personally, so that it doesn't feel as if everyone's jumping on them, but to help them think something through. So all of those things are important. So do set clear ground rules. Do make sure that only one person is talking at a time, that we have procedures for interrupting, for clarification, that respect is shown to views even if we may disagree with them, and that as the teacher we're making sure that we're challenging ideas when they come up. And actually getting pupils to give reasons often help for the view that they're holding, because sometimes when they work out they haven't got a reason for that view, actually they begin to change it themselves. So that's a little bit on facilitating those discussions. I think it's important that as teachers we affirm that everybody can make a contribution, and even if we don't agree with it, they can still make that contribution, and that we can all have something to learn from. I think if we can create reflective learners, then they're less likely to be learners who can be radicalised, because they are open and they are thinking. I think it's important for us to correct wrong information, and if we're not sure, that again, we don't always have to be the expert, that we can say, actually I'm going to go away and talk to some people about that and look some things up about that, because I'm not sure if that's true. And as we know, many young people access the internet, and there are all sorts of theories on the internet about everything. And obviously, when a theory is put forward, it's often put forward as fact when it's not. And pupils learning that is very important. Okay, so I do think we need to sometimes ask for clarification, to throw back questions, throw back points. We need to be honest without being ruthless. We don't want to destroy anybody in our classrooms, even if they are saying something that concerns us and worries us, because we want to be on a journey with them. We want them to keep talking to us, not to close up, but to keep being open and honest. And don't expect huge changes overnight. Change takes a little while to happen, but it can happen. So what are the risks when we challenge extremism? Well, we're going to upset people. And I think one of our British values, not the ones that Ofsted defines for us, but I do think one of our British values is that we don't really like challenging and objecting. We do like people being able to hold different views, and we don't like being rude. And so I think upsetting people is hard. Maybe that's not just a British thing, maybe that's just a human thing. But we are going to upset people, and so we need to know that. And we need to understand that sometimes they will bring other people into the discussion to validate the point they're making. Even if it's not a factual point, it will still be told to us as if it is. Because really they want to stop that discussion. They want to win the point. And so it's important that we have a strategy in place for dealing with that, that we understand that we can say, no, that is not right. There are these other points, and you do need to consider those. That is not the only way that this happens, or that is not what this particular book says. There are these things that the book says as well. And again, I wouldn't worry about going away and going to your expert help to find some of those places, because sometimes we don't know enough, but actually what we need is relationship at school with others who are experts, in different fields, in different cultures, in different religions, because that can help us give the information to go back and challenge with. And whatever happens, your approach needs to be your school's approach. That's really important. And you need to keep going back to whoever is your line manager or your mentor to let them know what you've done, how you've handled things. And in some cases, there will need to be written reports of those conversations and what has been said. So there is a record for the school showing how they have challenged and how they have handled a particularly difficult situation. So bringing things to an end now, it's really important, as you can see, to build up relationships within our own school of trust, but also with parents and the community around us. And that takes time. Relationships take time. Worthwhile relationships take time. Trust takes a while to build up. But it is worth keep doing that as a school and investing in that as a school. I've said on previous webinars about the importance of celebrating different festivals. Even if you haven't got large communities of those particular pupils in your school, it will mean a huge amount to those families and that wider community that your school is being inclusive and you're recognising their thoughts and practices, their beliefs. And that builds up trust with a school, and it's important. Again, I'm passionate and love religious education. And I think now, more than any time, it's really important that we're taking pupils out to places of worship. And if we haven't got places of worship, maybe arranging people to come in from different religions so that pupils can have that face-to-face interaction and get over some of natural fear of the unknown into having known that these places exist and there's nothing scary about them, and the people we met there were perfectly nice people. All of that is important and builds up things. And finally, that we see the big picture. That's really important in this, because schools are just one place that is trying to support families and particularly children and young people around extremist views and to help them find their path through it. So, that's got us to the end of the PowerPoint. So we've got a couple of questions that have come in, and I'm just going to read those out. So what should you do if, having had a classroom discussion with your pupils about extremism, and where you've challenged two pupils' attitudes towards the topic because you've been concerned, what do you do next? It's a really good question. Thank you very much for it. What I would suggest you do next is go and talk with your line manager and go and talk about what they've said that's concerned you. That you don't know what other things pupils have been saying, and this is why schools having a structure of where people go and what happens is really important, because there needs to be somebody who's got that bigger picture around these pupils. This may be just a one-off, and you may deal with that in a particular way. It may then fall into a bigger picture of other concerns that other teachers have had about them. And actually that then helps the school to maybe talk to one of the police officers that are linked to the school around Prevent, or it may be that they want to go via channel and talk to some other professionals, social workers and some other people, and look at what issues. It may not just be one issue, there may be a number of things that's going on in these pupils' lives. And actually we want to help them to be able to handle a situation, and we want to help them to be able to listen to challenge and to work that through. So don't feel you're on your own in it. Always go and talk to someone else. If you're still concerned and you're not happy with that response, then I do think it's worth going back again. It may be that you even want to talk with your head teacher or your deputy if they're not the person that you're line managed by. Because I think where we have concerns, we need to work those through and not just leave them to one side. And that sometimes can take time for us to do. So don't be worried about that. Don't be worried that you're taking up people's time. It's important. When we are concerned about pupils, it's important that we take it all the way through and we work that through. Sometimes it may be that we're able to have another conversation with the pupils, and without getting heavy and too intense with them, that we could give them some information to read and just say, look, next week I'm going to have a little chat to you about that, see what you think about that. Because I think some of the views that you were saying were just around one particular view, and there's some others. And because you're coming to adulthood, we're wanting to grow you up in the school, we're wanting to mature you. So can you have a read of this and can you come back to me and let's have a little chat about that next time. I found that really effective, that giving them some time to think often helps them to work through what's really at the centre of the issue. And sometimes that's because they don't want to let family down, sometimes that's because there is somebody that they like and they're wanting to impress, and all of these things coming out help us to deal with things. Remember as well, every school has a pastoral system, and it's important that you're plugging that information into that as well. We have another question which I'll read out. How do you deal with the objections of a parent who might not see a problem with their child's attitude? And that's very, very true. That can happen. And I deal with cases of that quite often. And I think then it is about having to have those conversations with the parents. And often that's where I'm brought in as an RE advisor, as an expert, to come in alongside the teacher or the senior leader within the school to have those conversations with a parent. Sometimes it's not me. Sometimes we arrange it to be people from a particular faith group who come in and have that discussion with the parent. It all depends on the situation, but I would say that's why it's really important to have those links out into the community, because that allows the community itself to challenge different things. So for instance, if you had a Christian who had maybe very extreme views in terms of sexuality, the school needs to put that in a context. We need to talk about the law of the land and what, as Britain, the law of the land is, and the context that the school works in, and actually the context of publicly stating views. And they need to have a think through of some of those things. I know in some schools they've held workshops around some of these things to help parents think through, to understand the context that they now live in, because particularly if they've come from other places in the world and maybe still first generation of living here, then they're trying to assimilate how things are done in one place to another place, and schools maybe and community organisations can help with that. So first of all, I think you do have to tackle the parents around things, and I also think that you tackle the child at the same time, and you use facts and you use evidence around that. And parents, unfortunately, I've had to say this quite a few, have choices around how their children are educated. They can homeschool them. That is a legal option that every parent has in this country. They can also pay for education and send their child to a private education school. That is also an option. And thirdly, if they choose their child to come to a state-funded, as far as they're concerned, free school, then there are do's and don'ts around that. And actually, they can't make options of what they're happy for their child to do and what they're happy for their child not to do or to learn about. There are things that happen because the state is paying that sort of £9,000 a year for each pupil to be there. So sometimes that needs to be stated so they understand the context of their choice. And when they're choosing in for state education, then they are choosing into a Western liberal mindset of education that says we're going to look at facts and we're going to think about what's right and what's wrong. But actually we do have a liberal ideology, i.e. there can be many different ideas about this topic. This is what the law says. You can hold a different view, but you cannot do certain things around that, because this is the way as a society we've agreed what's right. Okay, I hope that helps. Do remember there are more resources on the website to help you with all of these things, and also that you can email us in questions. We're thinking later in the year that maybe it might be helpful to have somebody else here with me and maybe do some questions around challenging extremism. So if you've got a question from listening and looking at our materials today, do email that in. That'd be really helpful, and we'll store those up, not forget about them, and use them at another point. So thank you very much for being with me. As always, it's lovely to have you out there, and I hope today has begun to help you think about how we as schools can challenge extremist views well and help young people to grow up to be able to participate and also make a positive contribution to 21st century life in modern Britain. I hope to see you again soon.